This is Inside the Wolf's Den, an entrepreneurial journey with Shawn and Joni Wolfswinkel.
Welcome back to Inside the Wolf's Den with your hosts, Shawn and Joni Wolfswinkel. Today we have a guest with us. We have Trey Stone. How are you, Trey?
Great to be here and doing well, enjoying this beautiful Texas summer weather.
Yes, awesome. Well, so just a short bio on Trey. So Trey, a visionary leader and trailblazer in the rental industry, brings unmatched expertise and dedication to his role as founder and CEO of Transformational Real Estate Investing, LLC. With a proven track record of owning and managing nearly over 6,000 apartment units and multiple single-family rentals, collectively valued at over $336 million, Trey's accomplishments speaks volumes. His influence extends beyond personal success. He has empowered over 400 families to earn more than $137 million from their rental properties by investing with him. Trey has also helped thousands of other people through his educational and mentoring programs over the last 20 years. Trey's leadership and industry impact are underscored by his historic achievement of being the first person to be named Rental Owner of the Year at the local, state, and national levels of the Apartment Association. As the 2014 president of the Houston Apartment Association, he set new standards and drove significant advancement within the industry. Trey's unparalleled dedication to transforming his properties, the lives of his residents, surrounding communities, and families' financial futures make him the trusted authority in repositioning workforce housing investments. So, again, Trey, I appreciate you being here today. There's a ton of knowledge here and lots to unpack here. So I just kind of want to get started. Like, how did this all get started with you?
You know, I was in college and I had worked really hard to kind of get out of my neighborhood. I earned a full scholarship to University of Texas, an academic scholarship. And I grew up in a low income area south of Houston where there was a lot of gang activity, a lot of drugs, a lot of crime. Just, it wasn't a great place to necessarily grow up. And it wasn't a place that I felt like there was going to be a lot of future, if I stayed there. And so after getting that scholarship to UT, I kind of was thrust into this position of not wanting to ever be poor, but having no one in my life that was wealthy to have me have any kind of a clue what, would lead to that, and just kind of seeking that out anywhere I could get it. Anybody I'd find out that was successful, I'd kind of beg them to go to coffee or go to lunch or what have you. And I had a professor who actually was my professor, both of accounting and then later also of real estate at the University of Texas when I was in business school there. His name was August Peterson. And so I, showed up to office hours and basically begged him to, talk to me a little bit, not about the subject, but just in general about, who did he know and, what could I do to be more successful and make money, because he had made references in the classes that I had taken with him to knowing other people in the business community. I remember he talked a lot about Eddie Safety was a close friend of his, and this guy was a president of a local bank and on all these different boards, and he used them as examples in the class. Like, okay, this guy knows people who have money. I didn't think he had any money as a professor, but he invited me out to his home. And when I got out to his home, I'm kind of like, holy crap, how's this guy afford this place? It was in Westlake Hills. You guys know that neighborhood in Austin? And he lived on Pascal Lane, which a lot of people call CEO Lane. It had the CFO of Dell. It had several other, like a big chief something officer of 3M, all these C-suite executives on this little mall cul-de-sac in Westlake Hills at the top of this gorgeous hill overlooking Lake Travis, where, Lake Travis kind of looks more like a river at that part because it's kind of long and skinny, but it's beautiful, all these rolling hills. And his house has multiple levels. It has an elevator. It has a first floor with a swimming pool, and it has another level that's got a big sport court and stuff, and it's got another level with like a putting green. It kind of cascades like around the edge of the hilltop. I'm like, this is insane. And he takes me to lunch at the Westlake Country Club, with his family, and his kids are coming up and running around on golf carts while we're hanging out there, and they go up, they order stuff, and they're like, I noticed they're not paying. I'm like, is it all free? How's this work? So blown away. But at some point, I was just not having any couth or manners at that point. At some point, I just said something like, hey, sorry to ask this, but how do you afford all this, man? Because in my mind, I'm like, there's no way as a professor, right? And he walked out and pointed out to a building in downtown Austin, which was the Frost Bank Tower. And he said, you see that building over there? And I was like, yeah, I've seen the building. I work as a bouncer downtown. I see it all the time. I'm down there. And he's like, for $7 an hour and no health insurance, but anyway. And he's like, well, I built that tower with H. Ross Perot and some other partners. And I've made all my money in real estate investing. And I teach because what I love doing and, helping kids like you. And that really had a big impact on me.
Wow.
And so he became a mentor to me. And he actually sold me my first investment property. He had a little rent house that he still owned from way, way before that was past the 27.5 year depreciation schedule. So God forbid you have to pay me tax on the rental income, right? And he was like, you know what? I've been wanting to unload this thing, but it just sits there. It's got a management company running it. You want to just buy this deal? And I'm like, great, but I have no money. And he's like, well, figure something out. So anyway, he wound up giving me some seller financing. I scraped together a little bit of money from, where I could pass the cup, raise a little bit of cash. And that was my first rental property. And that was in college. I just kind of kept going ever since that time.
Wow.
Well, we do have a lot in common there.
We started really young as well, but in college and similar stories, but and didn't know what we were doing. But how did you transition that into really the career of multifamily investing? And how did you go from, I guess, single family and because I think that's a big question a lot of investors ask, especially, there's a lot of people can envision in buying a single family house, but then taking that next step into a multifamily and kind of how did you progress? And we'll get into later how you kind of teach and your some of your mentoring and programs that you offer. But how did you take that next step into multifamily investing?
Well, it took me a little while. I did several rent houses first. And along the way, I wasn't making enough money, of course, from a few rent houses to pay my bills. And so I started a mortgage company. And I had two different mortgage companies. I had one that was what they called back then a net branch of a company based out of Frisco, just outside Dallas, where basically you would pay them a fee per file, $250, something like that. And they would keep all the compliance and paperwork on the back end done. And that was for single family residential properties. And then I found out that you didn't really have to have any kind of special license or sponsoring broker or anything like that to broker commercial loans. At least at that time, it was totally unregulated. And I knew some other people in the mortgage business that were tinkering around with trying on the side to place these commercial loans. And I thought, well, they can do it, I can do it. So I started just a little DBA. I didn't even have an LLC or anything. And I started trying to convince clients through the mortgage business that were, also involved in commercial real estate to let me finance those properties, to which all of them said no, over and over and over. And so I was, considering just forgetting about that. But finally, there was a guy, I won't say his last name, I don't have permission, but his first name was Mike. And he gave me a shot. And he let me finance his apartment complex. And in the process of doing that, I made every mistake you could possibly make. But I did manage to get this thing closed. And he actually was happy, with getting that done. I still remember the originator name. It was Steve Helm with Imperial Capital Bank, which I think was based out of California back at that time. And I was so proud, that I originated this commercial real estate loan. And as I went through that process, what I realized was it was actually easier once I had a client. It was actually easier to close that loan for Mike than it was for a lot of my single family investors at that time to qualify for financing on houses. And maybe it was because I wasn't very good at financing houses at that time in my career for investors. But whatever the reason was, I thought, man, you can qualify for these commercial properties just because the property itself is producing enough income, to help you qualify, which I had previously no idea about. And so as I started to kind of go down that rabbit hole and pursue more commercial loan origination opportunities with my mortgage business, I thought, well, again, if they can do it, I can do it. So I started trying to pull together a partnership of people to help me do my first apartment complex, which was a miserable failure. Everyone told me no. I got like a handful of people for like $5,000 a pop, which was going to get me nowhere towards the down payment. So finally, I kind of gave up and I gave everybody their money back that had tried to invest with me. And instead, I invested with a friend that I met by being his mortgage broker, actually. And, he said, look, come into a deal with me and you can learn and you can be a passive investor. And so I said, well, what's your minimum? And it was $100,000. And I was like, well, how about 30? Because that's what I could scrape together at the time. And he's like, no. But then I wouldn't leave him alone. And I just blew him up like I was a psychotic ex-girlfriend until finally he just gave in and was like, fine, if you'll leave me alone, you can be in the deal.
Yeah.
And he let me into that deal. And then I don't think he knew what he was signing up for, because I showed up, the day after we closed, like bright and early, 7 a.m. at the office. Like, what are we doing? He's like, we aren't doing anything. You're going home because you don't work here, buddy. Like, you're a passive investor and weren't even at the minimum. Like, honestly, why are you even here? And I'm like, well, I'll do anything. And so he tried to scare me off. And he said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, Trey, go power wash the sidewalk. It looked really bad in front of the office. And to this day, he has pictures of me power washing the sidewalks. I was happy. I was like, hey, something new. Yeah, I'll do it. So I'm out there power washing the sidewalk as after we close this apartment complex at 6150 West Tidwell between Bingle and Antoine. It was called Aspen Apartments.
Thanks.
209 units. And so I got out there and I started doing anything and everything that this guy would let me do. I didn't just follow him around. I followed the manager around. I followed the contractors around. I climbed up on a ladder in the rain behind CB Johnson, this crazy roofer that would be smoking a cigarette with one hand, talking on the phone with the other hand, using no hands, go up the ladder backwards. He actually went up backwards. He thought that was easier. And like at a run in the rain, this guy was like Spider-Man. And I'm like, the whole time, like, I'm going to fall. I'm going to die for sure. But oh, well, I'm going to learn this apartment stuff. And then what am I going to learn up there on top of the roof besides getting burned up by tar? But I'm up there. And so I just, anything and everything I could do, I followed around. And so that was kind of my introduction to multifamily.
I can just picture all that happening. That's pretty hilarious.
Yeah. Once my buddy Embry just realized, like, okay, this crazy guy is just not going to leave me alone. And he's like, I'm going to start giving him stuff to do. So I would help out with just various things, little staffing related things. I would do stuff like audit the delinquent and prepaid report. And I would go, walk units and double check the manager had everything correct on the make ready board. I would do basic data entry tasks for him, like entering in accounts payable. It was his second apartment complex. And so he didn't have like a big management company yet. He was doing it all himself. Mm-hmm. And so like, hey, there's some AP he could pawn off to me and, free labor. So I was just kind of free indentured servant to my buddy Emery for anything that he wanted or anybody else at the property. Like if somebody had an issue, and a couple of times I went and cleared people out, that were up to no good, after hours at the property. Did that also for free and convinced people that were shooting dice behind the laundry room and stuff that they should do that somewhere else because my money's in this deal. And one of us is coming out of this, not in a good position if you don't leave, but we're going to find out which one. And they're like this. It was like that. I think it was like that Men in Black thing. You remember that scene where like he goes in for the chest and there's like a monster doing like pull-ups from the street light thing. And there's all the different stuff. And the only one that he shoots is like the little girl that has like the stack of books of like physics and all the other stuff. And then they say like, why'd you shoot her? But none of the monsters. He's like, well, this guy's working out. And this guy's just trying to catch a ride. This guy's doing that. But she's in the middle of the hood, little white girl by herself with a bunch of books on like, astronomy and physics and all this other stuff and all these aliens around, she's up to no good. And I think the only thing that allowed me to survive was they were like, okay, all the people in that area, it was a pretty low income property, a pretty rough part of town. I mean, officers shot and killed right across the street, like same month that we closed. I mean, it was hardcore, gang warfare part of town. And they were like, this crazy white boy that's clean cut with no tattoos in the property in the middle of the night telling us that we have to go back inside of our units. He's either totally insane or he's a ninja. I don't know. Let's just go. Like, it's not worth it. And so anyway, I did all that kind of stuff. And from there, I was able to convince people that, hey, I'm an apartment owner now, right? I'm in a deal. I'm learning about it. And I really did immerse myself that I absorbed quite a bit. And I was able to convince investors to get behind me to do a 178 unit property about 8 months after getting into that deal. Then about another 6 months later, I went and bought another deal that was a little over 200 units. And then I guess about a year after that, I bought a 381 unit. And then in less than a year, I bought another 3,000 units. And so I just scaled very, very quickly once I kind of got the formula. But it was just about getting access, which is what's so hard, I think, for a lot of people, just getting in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What in all your stories and in a lot of your experiences in life, you have this like you'll do whatever it takes kind of attitude to learn and I don't know, but you don't like you embrace, you'll learn, you'll do whatever it takes. Mm-hmm. But what drives that, or where? I mean, I don't know if it's still today, but even back then, like what? Because I think a lot of people, everybody wants more in life, but they're not necessarily willing to do what it takes in a lot of situations. So, what was that inner drive in you that would, like that instance? Just I doubt too many people would invest in an apartment complex and then show up the next day,
willing to work and
want to do whatever, and learn. But where do you think drove that, for you?
I think I grew up, as I mentioned, in a pretty low income area. And, when I was a kid, I just saw a lot of things happen. I had half a dozen friends killed, in school. And I saw a lot of people winding up, in jail or the morgue, after school. They're a little bit older that I knew, or I knew through my friends' siblings. And, there was a lot of motivation for me. I was also a white kid in a 93% Hispanic neighborhood that was actually, I could be more specific than that, was 93% Mexican. We really didn't have anybody from any other Latin American countries at that time in Pasadena. Now there's a whole lot. I mean, I've now owned a bunch of apartments there. I've owned the mall there. So I know the demographics for the area now, and they've diversified a lot. But it was, this very strong majority, Mexican American, first generation immigrant base there. And when you grow up in a low income area and you're different and you don't necessarily fit in with the other kids in the area, and you're a little nerd like I was, then you get beat up a lot. I get beat up going to and from school and just, trying to go to the corner store. We had this, remember this Dolly Madison outlet, which was basically like when stuff was too old for them to sell at the grocery store anymore, they'd go stock it there. And I would always go over there if I could get a couple bucks together and go buy Dale donuts and stuff like that, whatever, bring them home because they were cheap. But it was like a gauntlet to not get jumped, getting from my house, to and from that little Dolly Madison bakery, overstock, whatever you call it, when the stuff gets halfway expired, where I'd go buy it. And so just that neighborhood was really a huge driver for me, that I did not want to ever live again in a place like that. I never wanted to raise kids in a place like that. And I didn't want to wind up, either in jail or in a morgue. And I felt like those were strong possibilities being in that neighborhood. So I'm not saying that it was the worst place to grow up ever. I had a lot of good memories as a kid. I didn't really, especially very young, really even grasp all that yet. It was just normal to me. And I know that a lot of people probably grew up in places much, much worse. I've spent some time training my hobby in MMA and jiu-jitsu down in Brazil. And I walked through the favelas down there. And my gosh, I grew up in paradise compared to the people that are growing up, in that environment. But all that being said, it wasn't like this, Norman Rockwell painting type of, childhood. And so I just was intensely motivated to not be poor. And I wanted to have a family, and I wanted to raise that family somewhere that was different than, where I grew up. So that was my driver.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah. So what drew, you said the mortgage industry, and then you saw the opportunity within multifamily from some of your clients that you service, but can you explain some of the advantages you feel are in multifamily versus some of the other asset classes out there?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the great thing about single family, to kind of contrast in my answer, because I don't want people to feel like, that's not a great place to start. I mean, I got started there. It's a great place to start. But the thing about single family is that while it has a lower barrier to entry, it also has a lower ceiling. And a lot of people think it's just about scale. They think, oh, well, it's like Monopoly, right? You buy enough of little greenhouses, you turn them in for a red hotel. And there's some truth to that. There's certainly efficiencies and economies of scale with overhead and things like that when you run a large number of units in one place in a complex versus in a house. But I think that really the bigger delineator and the biggest factor for myself and my family and the families that have invested with me, over the years, is that the valuation methodology is completely different. A lot of people don't know that. They think that they're all valued the same based on the comps. But the truth is that, completely unlike a home where the value is always going to be limited to similar properties in the same, area that have similar characteristics to the property that you are buying, with an apartment complex, it doesn't really matter. So if my property is really well managed and full and making a ton of money, and properties that are similar to it in terms of year built and the product offering, the unit mix, et cetera, they're in the exact same submarket as mine, are really, really run down and, in disrepair and have low occupancy and high turnover and high crime and lots of problems, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really affect my appraisal. My appraisal is based on my net operating income, because nobody buys an apartment complex just to live in one of the units. So a lot of people don't understand that. And therefore, the only value of an apartment complex to an investor, and to therefore the appraisal process in terms of validating that number, is all based on how much profit or income it produces. And there's really no limit on your ability to continue to increase the income and grow it, over time if you run it the right way. And there's also a lot of creative things you can do to reduce expenses over time with those properties as well. So you just sort of have this big multiplier effect. And there's a book one of my former employees wrote called The Complete Guide to Buying and Selling Apartment Buildings. His name is Steve Burgess. Great book, great guy. And, in that book, he, I think, explains it better for people than I can do in a podcast episode. But in general, you take the net operating income divided by cap rate, and that equals value. And the prevailing cap rate, if you look at my exits of all my deals, which are turnkey when I'm done with them, has been around 5%. And so a simple way to think about it is 5 goes into 120 times. So for every dollar that I add of income and that net number every single year for my property, for every dollar I add, it adds $20 in value at a 5% cap rate, if that makes sense, because, divided by the 5% is the same thing as multiplying by 20. And so that principle right there is so powerful because you can go increase the value and get a payback of 20 to 1 on every dollar that you increase. And I think the other big difference is that the way that, the finance structure is, it lends itself, to putting together kind of the GP LP structure, like I've done on so many deals. And that's kind of the standard for doing apartment deals, unless you're a big institutional firm, raising money through Wall Street. And it's kind of not as much the standard with single family properties. And so your ability to scale is not only, better in terms of how much you can scale the value of the asset, not being limited to just a comparable sale valuation, but also your ability to scale your overall business by bringing in other investors that see what you're doing, that believe in you, and that share your vision, and then just continue to have that word spread to more and more investors and do more and more deals. Whereas with single family, a lot of people, unless they can find kind of one angel investor, a lot of times they kind of run out of money and then they have to stop and wait a little while, which, hey, better than not doing it at all. But you can't grow at the same pace that, say, for example, I did, which allowed me to retire at 35. I mean, I haven't bought a deal or had a job now since 2015. And that's something, and I'm 45 today. And that's something that has been really amazing for my family, to be able to get all that time with the kids when they're really small and, just kind of enjoy life a little more and reap the rewards of my labor. And as opposed to waiting, 30 or 40 or 50 years like some people do, and then maybe even then not being able to retire at the end of that. That's not, I don't think, as possible at the scale that I wanted to do it at, with the amount of money that I wanted to make, with my fear and anxiety of poverty and the way that I grew up. I set some really, really high goals. And to hit those, I could have never hit those starting from nothing to generating a 6-figure income per month, even in retirement, even after selling everything in my portfolio except for one deal by the age of 35. Like, no way I could have done that in that amount of time if I would have been trying to scale just with gradual equity capture and cash flow and principal reduction and appreciation in single family. So the scalability factor and no limit on the ceiling of your value make multifamily investing just a much more powerful tool for building larger amounts of wealth and bringing in more people to the equation, which is another type of leverage, not just the bank, but leveraging other people's money as investors. So that's probably way more of an answer than you wanted. And I talked for too long, but anyway, that's the answer. So I hope that's okay.
I love that. Trey, so as an educator in real estate investing, what are maybe some key principles or strategies that you emphasize to your students?
The first thing I always tell people is that it really, for me, kind of starts with Christian values. I think that the way that you approach your business, whether it's about the way that you pursue your partners, whether it's the promises that you make when you're putting deals together, whether it's the promises that you make to your lender, whether it's the way that you treat your applicants and your residents, the way that you treat your employees, the way that you build your team. I think everything, just kind of doing the right thing. And a person doesn't have to be Christian necessarily. I have lots of different investors and friends of different faiths. And I think we share, common values of just trying to do what we were taught was do the right thing, and I know that sounds a little bit cheesy or basic, but the reality is that there's a lot of people that equate being successful as a landlord with, trying to somehow get over on somebody else. And they're not really approaching it from a win-win perspective with a seller. They're not really approaching it from a win-win perspective with a tenant. They're not really approaching it from a win-win perspective with an employee. And the problem is, if you approach it that way, you'll never develop long-term relationships. So, a guy was just emailing me this morning asking for a meeting. that I did my first, transaction with 25 years ago.
Wow.
Looking to work with me again. And it was funny in my email back to him. I said, I'm tied up today, but we could do it next week. Here's some times. And I said, by the way, you remember your protege from 20 years ago? Hey, we closed the deal together 2 years ago. I can't wait to tell you about it when we talk. And so just these long-term, relationships that I've formed, whether it be with, professionals like my attorney and CPA and mortgage broker, or whether it be with just colleagues in the industry that I can bounce ideas off of them, people that I talked to 20 years ago when I knew a lot less than I do now. I'm still talking to them today, but we've grown together. So we have different questions, but there's always still questions. Things keep evolving. And so I think building long-term strategic partnerships and relationships with other people of quality, and recognizing that deals may come and go, but your reputation is forever, and fiercely protecting that by, staying true to your values. I think ultimately you'll figure the rest of this stuff out. I feel like sometimes we're like a Roomba, right? Where we go forward and bump into something, and go back over this way and bump into that, and go this way and going to bump into that. But we eventually figure out where we're going. And as long as you're transparent and have integrity in what you're doing, then people understand your mistakes as you learn, as long as you don't make the same mistake over and over again, right? But in terms of people that don't protect their reputation and their integrity, then those mistakes take them down, because everybody's rooting for them to go down.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy that they're going down. And as opposed to when you treat people the right way, I'm not saying that you have to just be a pushover. You still have to be a firm business person.
Right.
But when you treat people the right way, people are rooting for you, and they'll help prevent you from going down and warn you when they see something happening. And then as you're falling, help catch you. And it may sound cheesy, but I feel ultimately like that's been, the biggest key to my success, is that a lot of people that are around me today were around me 20 years ago. And I think that's when I recognize another person that has their circle of professionals. And I'm not talking about just who you ever got born into, whatever family or, whatever neighborhood, you were born into, but I'm talking about people in your career that were part of your success on your way up. When they're still a part of your success, decades later, I know this is a person that I want to spend time with, because we're going to have that key set of Christian values in common. And from there, that's just, I think, a springboard for a lot of possibilities to make money together.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think, especially in today's, environment and
Totally.
A lot of what you see, you probably know this more than we do. You see out there some of the risk and some of the, I think multifamily has been the topic and hot button for several years now. And we've had a lot of, I think, bad apples, that it always attracts people that, trying to get rich quick.
Right.
And that can be done, but it also, sometimes they take shortcuts. And so you've seen a lot of multifamily syndicators go down and don't share the same values that you just mentioned. And so I think that's important that you highlighted that. Can you speak to, some of the, how do you manage the risk in today's climate environment? How are you mitigating some of that in today's climate for your portfolio and protecting your investors? What are some key things that you look for that you're doing?
I think the main thing that I see with risk is really knowing where you're investing and what you're investing in. I read a book early in my career, 20 years ago, called The Real Estate Finance and Investment Manual. And it had to be the most miserable book I've ever read in my entire life. I think it was probably a college textbook for like an MBA program. But I basically used to just go to Barnes & Noble when I had no money and hang out. They used to have the bean bags, like the little chairs and stuff, and like a Starbucks attached. And I would just go and hang out and read books, for free. And I would even put bookmarks and put them back on the shelf, because a lot of them nobody would read. I'd come back and my bookmark would still be there. And I would work my way through, the self-help section, work my way through the real estate section. So at some point I settled on this book, and it became like a challenge. Can I finish this god awful thing? Because it was, really, really small print and lots of lines of text and front and back and no pictures and like this thick. And it was just like, am I really going to do this? Yes, I am. And the one thing I remember clearly from that book that made all of that misery of reading this super dry book worthwhile is that it said you could massively mitigate your risk if you are a complete master and expert of the area in which you are investing, because so much of the risk in real estate is around trends in that area. And those may be trends of development, they may be trends of, gentrification or impoverishment. They may be trends of crime. They may be trends of demographics. They may be, so many different things. And like using Houston as an example, my home market, we have no zoning and we have cheap land and always more of it in our surrounding, sprawl. I mean, you can drive, people talk about you can drive for 8 hours and you're still in Texas. I think sometimes with traffic, you can drive for 8 hours and still be in Houston. And so, when you're dealing with that, what I've learned over the years owning now stuff in all these different pockets all over my market, and buddies owning properties as well, all over Houston, is that there could be, this invisible line that doesn't show up on a map where property A and property B look right next to each other. But the thing is that if you know that market extremely well, you know how things shift or how they change in terms of that neighborhood just across XYZ street, the north to the south of it or east to west of it. And that level of market expertise also lends itself to knowing your numbers. So whether it's single family or whether it's multifamily, when you go into a deal already knowing the rents in the area, already knowing what the expenses typically run in the area, already knowing generally kind of what specials are predominant in the area at that time, already knowing, what the typical turnover would be for similar properties in the area, just having all of that data, having a clear understanding of your avatar and your customer profile, who you're looking to rent to make sure that it's a broad swath of the market, not something that's so niche that you're not going to be able to keep it full because it's not a big enough, chunk of demand. Just all that knowledge of that local area, I found to be, really the gem that I extracted from that miserable book that now made it like a great book that I read at the beginning of my career. So I've had so many opportunities to invest, in other parts of the country. And what I've learned is that by saying no to that, it has helped me in two ways. Number one, and most importantly, it protects my balance and my time with my family. The picture behind me on our podcast today is of our family ranch and, getting out there, and a lot with the kids. I can't be in necessarily, Oregon or wherever else. So because everything is here, I'm free to make practices, not just games. I'm free to take them out, quickly on a weekend out to the country or to see other family members. But the other reason it's been really helpful is to your question with risk mitigation. I know my market. I know my numbers. I don't even really take the seller's numbers seriously, Shawn. When I get those numbers over, I just kind of laugh like, okay, whatever. And I put in what the real numbers are because I've specialized in one market for so long that I already know, regardless of what their income statement says, that once I renovate and stabilize this property and bring it to my standard, I know what the rents are going to be. I know what my turnover is going to be. I know what my expenses are going to be. And so my pro forma is a pro forma built on experience. Now, if I were to go tomorrow, after all these years of doing this, right, and I were to go buy something in, California, I were to go buy something in New York, where I'm unfamiliar with the landlord-tenant law requirements, I'm unfamiliar with the values, I'm unfamiliar with the difference between one neighborhood on the next neighborhood that look like they're the same neighborhood on a map, but in real life may not be. When you get up close and personal, you might not even pick it up just flying into town. But because it's an area that I've lived in and I've worked in, I've owned property in for so long, and my network of other owners owning property in the same area for so long, it just eliminates so much of that risk because I already know pretty much exactly what that property is going to do. And the only other thing I guess I would layer that with is just consistency. You get your 10,000 hours in doing something and probably do that. What I have figured out when I've tried to do other, product types is that I can make money in other areas of real estate, but why? Like the ratio of the amount of work I have to put in, to the money that I can make versus doing what I've already mastered and just doing more of that.
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense to me to take on that additional risk of those other asset types and business models. And so people bring me ideas, especially when I retired, these last 9.5 years, not doing anything. They're like, oh, you got nothing to do, come get involved in this, come get involved in that. And the power of no, just like, no, I'm not going to invest in something I don't understand. I'm not going to invest in something that I don't personally manage and have control over. And I think that's the third and final piece I'll throw out there is that so many people are, really, a buddy of mine, one of my mentors, John Quinlan, he once said to me, a guy who's worth several $100 million from nothing, grew up above the bar where his dad was a bartender in Ireland with multiple brothers and sisters in a 1-bedroom apartment above the bar where the dad worked. And he came here and he, put himself through school and became a successful attorney, and then has become a massively successful real estate investor. But he said, some people will go to the ends of the earth to avoid dealing with their properties. And so, example, it's one thing to hire a property management company, which I recommend for many of our clients. It's another thing to think that the property management company is your asset manager, is your value creation, specialist. Like, you still have work to do as the owner. You need to have a plan for this property, what you're planning on doing. The property management company can't just do that for you. And maybe you get lucky and you find one that will or that can. But typically, just to make that assumption is massively risky, because what happens when they don't execute? I was at a guy's property the other day. He's owned it 2 years, and he had this property management company doing a horrific job. He bought a little 18-unit property, really nice guy. Actually bought it from one of my other partners who sold it to him. They didn't know each other. I didn't know them at the same time. This guy's a new client. Just turns out he bought it from a previous client that's been in 5 deals with me, and I've mentored him in 2 deals of his own. And it's good for my first client that I wasn't mentoring the second guy, because I never would have let him pay what he paid my first client for this property. But he gets into this deal. He hires the management company, and unfortunately, they're just not doing the job. They're not taking care of the property, and he doesn't really know how to hold them accountable. When I first started working with him, he's an awesome guy, by the way, super smart. Just didn't have a mentor, in multifamily. And so, he literally didn't have an income statement, and he owned the property already for 2 years. The first thing we did was we created one from his bank statements and credit card statements to try to figure out, was the income going in and out? And yet he had a management company. How do you have a management company, but they're not even producing any accountability with financial statements for the property? Well, that happens when you're just divorced from your investment completely, physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever. You're not in it. And so I think that, having that owner operator, hands-on, know your numbers, know your property, combined with, once you have a product type and a business model, sticking with that consistently, not being all over the place. And then, as I started off with, just being in the same geographic area and master that area, know everything there is to know about it. You do those 3 things. And generally speaking, there's really, from my point of view, this may sound a little crazy, but there's not that much risk, because you've kind of de-risked the deal by doing all those 3 things. And I'm sure there's 50 more you guys could come up with. You guys are in the business, but those are the ones that jump out to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Trey, one question I have for you. So if we have an investor who is looking to get into the multifamily space, what advice would you give them?
The first thing I tell them is to really look for a value play. I see so many people that they kind of want to buy a turnkey deal. And, if they're wanting to buy one of mine, fantastic. But if I'm mentoring them and they're going to go buy, on their own, they're not my student, right? Then I feel like that's such a huge mistake, because when you buy, they call it a yield play to give it a sexy name. But the problem is that a yield play is basically paying market value for a deal because you're too lazy to do the work to add any value. And then in the long run, if anything goes wrong, you have no margin of safety. Warren Buffett talks a lot about the margin of safety, in his deals over the years. And so I think our margin of safety is twofold. Number one, it's buying at the right time in the market, where prices are lower, and taking advantage of a, buyer's market when you're buying, taking advantage of a seller's market when you're selling. But the other part of it is not being afraid to nurse a sick puppy back to health, because when you do that, you can screw up a lot and it's going to be okay, even though you're new, because you're going to get a much better price going in. And then that leeway is going to protect you from whatever mistakes that you're making as a new investor. And I think new investors think the opposite. They think, well, I'm new, so I want to go into multifamily. I should buy one where there's nothing to do.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is when they make a mistake in their underwriting, or they make a mistake in their management, or they make a mistake in the way they position it for disposition, or the way that they finance it, or anything else that they make a mistake in, they had no margin of safety. They paid full market value for the property, even by their own, perhaps flawed underwriting of that value. So instead, focusing on value play opportunities where there's a lot of upside in the deal, but you're going to have to do some renovation. You're going to have to do some work. You might have to do some re-tenanting. You have to take that on. I think that even if you're doing it on your own, you're still more protected by getting that lower cost basis of buying a deal with all that upside than you are trying to buy something that's quote unquote easy, but that you have to pay top of the market for because you have no room to make any mistakes. And you're only more likely to make them because you're new.
Yeah.
And I know you asked me one, but I'm going to throw in a second, just because it's so critical, is getting a mentor. I don't care if it's a paid mentor, it's a free mentor, it's a friend from work. That makes me think of that story movie with him and the whole, but whatever it is, you've got to know somebody that's done it. And even if they've done it, in a slightly different way, maybe they've run large apartment deals. You're buying a small one. Maybe they have small ones. You're buying a big one. Maybe they have got, a mixed use project that's got some apartment units in it, and you're buying your first multifamily deal. And you're like, well, that's different. Right. But at the same time, there was a multifamily component. If you don't have a mentor that's done what you're trying to do, your odds of failure are drastically higher than if you had somebody helping you.
Yep.
But it's not enough just to have a mentor and then go buy it's a perfect, easy turnkey deal and pay top of the market. Because now, even with a mentor, when you're new, you'll make mistakes and you're not protected with any margin of safety. So value play number one for the type of deal to buy, have a mentor number two.
Yeah.
Can you, since you brought that up with the mentorship, can you talk a little bit about your program and some of the education that you guys offer and mentorship, and how does that work? What do you guys do? Kind of speak through that.
You twist my arm to give myself a commercial. Okay. I'll do that.
Yes.
So, what we do is transformational real estate investing. We focus on deals that we help people acquire that need this kind of transformation I was just talking about, where you're going to add value. And we have, 3 different ways that we help people do that. One of them is through our basic educational program that people can enroll in for as little as $1,000, and they go to classes every week all year long, and they get to network with other people that have done it before. In fact, I'd love to have you guys come out to a case study sometime and present one of your deals. I know you have a lot.
Yeah. That would be awesome.
To present. That'd be fun. But then, in addition to that program with all of our different classes and expert speaker nights and case study where we look at deals that members have done, our big 2-day class, we kind of give you the whole run through of womb to tomb, our business model. Aside from all of that, we also have people that say, okay, that's all wonderful and I want to do all that, but I don't really want to just take the information and go apply it myself. I want someone to take me by the hand and actually go through my individual deal that I'm going to go buy, help me find it, help me underwrite it, help me understand it, whether it's single family or multifamily. And so for that, we have a mentoring program that's kind of a separate track from just our education program. So think of it like that software package where, you can buy like the basic level or the more advanced level, and you still get all the check boxes for the basic level, but you also get some additional things. And that comes in the form of that one-on-one mentoring with single family and multifamily mentors. And then the third way that we help people is through syndication. So I put deals together and people partner with me in those deals directly. They do typically, not always, but typically have to be accredited, which means their net worth has to be at or greater than $1 million, not including the equity in their primary residence. So they're outside their house where they live in. They've still got $1 million or more dollars, and it could be an IRA or 401k or savings or investment accounts. It doesn't really matter where else it is, aside that it just can't be equity in their primary residence. That doesn't count according to the SEC. But outside of that, as long as their net worth is $1 million or higher, and as long as we have an alignment of vision and values as we kind of go through our screening process, because we do have that. I did not have that at the beginning of my career. Big mistake. Now I understand, partners are like spouses. Yeah, you're entering into a long-term relationship. True. So you might not want to get married after the first date, get to know yourselves a little bit. And hence the rest of our program, by having the education and mentoring program, we get to know our clients very, very well. And we get to understand their financial circumstances and their personalities and what they're about. And for people that, stand out as someone that would be great to do business with and where it meets their needs and they have the resources, then that third product line allows them just to directly partner with me and put money into apartment deals that my team and I go out and put together and transform. And I think what they really love about it the most is that whether we're helping them do it or they do it with us, our mission is to basically, and I say my mission has become our mission. That's how it is when you're the CEO a little bit, hopefully, is that I don't want kids to grow up the way that I grew up. And so when we buy these properties, we are extremely aggressive about improving the safety for the residents of the properties. I don't know anybody else that spends $150,000 on lighting alone, even on a medium-sized apartment complex, like what I would do. But I have drone footage from my lighting vendor, Mike Rentz, over at the Perfect Light, where when it looks, from the air, like there's a power outage in the whole area, and there's just this one baseball stadium in the middle, but there's no power outage. It's just I'm not exaggerating. It's that level of contrast, in the drone footage. It's really cool.
Yeah.
All the way to the fact that we have 3 different layers of security. And then, of course, we fix everything. So all the renovations and so forth to try to, reposition these assets. What happens, you don't just transform, the investors' lives by making them a lot of money, but you also transform these properties and these communities and the environment where these children grow up. You transform their futures because you're breaking generational curses, not having kids grow up at 8, 9 years old, running money and drugs back and forth between trap houses and cars, like in my neighborhood. Yeah. Instead, you have them growing up in a place where they feel safe. And hey, you never make a place 100% safe, right? Like that's not physically possible anywhere, in the world. But comparatively, compared to what it was like when I bought the property or when my clients buy the property, if they're following our formula, it'll be night and day different for anybody that's growing up there. And then what happens is that spills over into the surrounding community because the businesses in the area, the schools in the area, the churches in the area, everything that surrounds those properties is affected by who's allowed to live there and by what's going on there. Because unfortunately, these low-income apartment communities are where the majority of the murders and rapes, assault, sexual assaults, where all those things take place. Mm-hmm. So when you come in and transform a community completely away from that and make it a much more family-oriented environment, it doesn't just affect that one property. It affects everything in the entire area. I remember for years I'd go eat at Rosnowski's Hamburgers at 34th and TC Jester. And, Rob and Debbie Rosnowski would not let me pay. Because they were so grateful for what I had done next door. Wow. That Debbie was like in tears thanking me because we came in and bought this property next to her that was just a den of gangs and drug dealing and human trafficking of underage girls. And as we bought this property and turned it around, all that completely changed. And so the shopping center next door, where they had owned their business for decades and their family that was on the verge of closing, was suddenly rejuvenated, right? And so that's what we do as part of our programs. We try to emphasize that there's a lot of ways you can go make money. But if you do real estate the right way, you can make money while you transform communities and people's lives very profoundly. And I think that's far more rewarding than just the fact that you make a lot of money. It also happens to be a very profitable way to do real estate because when you add that much value and turn these properties around, you're obviously buying them at a much, much lower price because of the condition that they're in, and then exiting at a much, much higher value for the asset that you've created. So it happens to be profitable to do the right thing. But I think you have to approach the vision of providing this quality workforce housing to, middle to lower income families that desperately need it, where there's a huge shortage of affordable product that's still quality, where their kids can be safe. And if you solve that problem, then the money will take care of itself. Even if you screw up a lot along the way, the money still takes care of itself because you exponentially increase the value of a property when you transform it in that way. Yeah. So our program is all about teaching people that vision so that it's not just the deals that people do with me, but hopefully that they're going out and doing these deals and they're teaching somebody else how to go out and do it. They're teaching somebody else to go out and do it so that it can provide kind of a domino effect of change that I think our country desperately needs because this is the rubber meets the road. This is where, the difference makes with the next generation, how they grow up.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I love all that you're doing and the stories.
It just gives me chills.
Yeah,
you talking
awesome.
about that.
So the one thing I want to put in there is Trey is doing something cool. So if you text Wolf to 281-990-1108, yeah, him and his team are going to get you all his information on his programs, what he offers. If you're interested in looking for a syndicator and somewhere to place your money, they can get you all that information. So we'll have that in the show notes so you can reach out to Trey and his team and get more information. But we have a couple more questions. And I know
we can go on for probably an hour longer. This is so good, but yeah.
Yeah, but one thing I wanted to ask you while I got you. So you see a lot of deals probably past your desk. You see a lot of what's going on in the multifamily real estate industry. What trends are you seeing? Where do you see, I know financing is a little rocky right now in the multifamily space. So there's still a lot of people that, had low interest rates, low debt, and some of those are going to be coming up to needing to be refinanced. What are you seeing? What trends are you seeing? And kind of speak a little bit, maybe a crystal ball of what you're seeing for the future.
Sure. The trend I see right now is that the chickens are coming home to roost.
Yeah.
What I see is that a lot of people have been buying when it was very much a seller's market.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have been influenced by greed in doing so, and they've raised a lot of money. I think it's more heartbreaking to see it happen when it's somebody's own personal, money that they put into a deal. But it's not so much heartbreaking. It's more frustrating to me when I see people that ought to know better, that are large syndicators who've gone out and raised large amounts of money, people's life savings. They put it into these deals.
Right.
And they put it into these deals knowing that the deals were at all-time highs, massive asset bubble prices. They were supported by underwriting that was not sustainable. And then just to kind of add insult to injury, they said, you know what? Just so we can make a little bit more of our promote and still have the deal pencil out, how about we go ahead and do an adjustable rate mortgage? And don't worry, we'll buy a rate cap because our lender is going to force us to anyway. And so it'll be fine for now. Well, guess what? Now has come along.
Right.
And for now is over. And we're into the part where now that rate cap is up. And if you look at TREP, the database where you can see all of the different commercial properties debt, and it goes through all the servicing departments and gets posted there, there are trillions of dollars in properties that are less than a 1.0 debt service coverage ratio. There are trillions of dollars in properties that have expiring notes, that have maturing, interest rate caps on those notes, where to go and buy a new interest rate cap and buy down that rate for another X number of years would cost on these large commercial assets millions of dollars that the original investors are not going to be able to afford or be willing to put up. And so those people are going to get wiped out is what's going to happen. And right now there's a lot of extend and pretend, or as we call it, jujitsu, lay and pray, where banks are just kind of like, really, really quiet. We can tiptoe out of the forest because, somebody will ride up on a white horse and save us, with lower interest rates. But I was having coffee for a couple of hours of the day with Dr. Dotzer that spoke at, Joni and I's event earlier this year. And, Mark was the head of the Texas A&M Real Estate Center for 18 years, where he had a half a dozen PhDs reporting to him. He's on a first name basis with various Fed chairmen all around the country. He's many times been on, CNBC and other, high level programs talking about economics, and specifically economics related to real estate trends, real estate projections, real estate performance. He's the only economist that I've been listening to now for a very long time. I've been going to his speeches annually for close to 20 years at various venues, typically the Road Oaks Country Club, before that sometimes the Houston Country Club, recently at our event. And he's been right almost the entire time. Normally economists are about like weathermen. They're right like 50% of the time. So it's like, oh, okay, great. You said that. Why don't I do the opposite? It's got equal chance of working out. What's the point? But this guy just seems to be consistently right. And I noticed that a lot of what he says all comes from data. He doesn't have any political allegiances. He hates both parties. He doesn't have any concern whether you like what he's going to say or not. Like at that coffee, Joni, before we went up there and talked in that panel that you and I were on, he said, I just want to warn you, I'm going to say X, Y, and Z, and your investors might not like it. So are you sure you want me to do that? And he said, because if what you want me to do is change what I'm going to say, I can already tell the answer is no, and I'm not refunding you your money. And I'm like, no, Mark, it's fine. You can tell the truth. And the truth is that the only circumstance right now that most people can foresee politically in this country is that we're going to continue printing money. As dumb as that is, that's what's likely to occur, because you don't hear Democrats or Republicans talking about let's tighten our belts. Americans need to accept a lower standard of living with a higher level of taxation so we can pay down our national debt, so we can, secure our currency and put ourselves in a position for our children, our grandchildren's future. You don't hear anybody saying that. And it's because it would be very politically unpopular to do so. Then they're more concerned with getting themselves reelected than they are with doing what's right. And so as a result of this, sorry to sound cynical, but, math, I'm a finance major, and math doesn't really care about feelings. And the math says that as we're having to roll over all this national debt that was financed originally at, 1-2% rates of interest, now at 4, 5, 6% rates of interest, it's ballooning at an exponential rate. So all we're going to do is just take on more debt to pay on the existing debt, not to pay it off, but to pay toward it, to service that debt.
Mm-hmm.
And as a real estate investor, we're all pretty familiar, I think, with how debt works and how that can be very good or it can be very bad, when you have leverage, depending whether it's positive leverage or negative leverage. And we have negative leverage. And so what the politicians do in order to deal with this is that they print more money. And the $4 trillion that we just printed during COVID is the reason that now we have massive inflation. And the only thing that the Fed can really do, I mean, maybe they'll get rid of Jay Powell and somebody will do something, worse. But kudos to Jay Powell. It might not be popular, but he's doing what he should do, which is to try to combat inflation. You do have to raise rates. Otherwise, you create hyperinflation. Then we're Argentina all of a sudden, right? Mm-hmm. So to avoid that scenario, he's doing the only thing the Fed can do, which is increase rates. And you look at what Dr. Dotzer and others are saying that are experts in that field. None of them are forecasting that we're going to get big rate drops. The ones that have any kind of history of being right anyway, that aren't affiliated, being paid by one party or the other to spout their agenda. But the ones that is just data driven and that's all they care about. They don't care about our opinion of them. They're not trying to be popular. They don't care about their hairstyle. They just care about the data says this. And Joni, is that pretty accurate with Mark?
Yeah, totally accurate.
Yeah. When you listen to them talk, that's the expectation. Mm-hmm. So, looking at that trend, I think it's a horrible time to be a seller. It's an unbelievable time to be a buyer. Yeah. It's a time where there's going to be a massive transfer of wealth. And the people who are in a position to benefit from that will grow their wealth exponentially. The people who have made bad, greedy decisions in an overpriced market with unwise financing choices are going to get wiped out, period. I was just touring a property this past week where the loan on the property that's on the property today is almost double the property value. I put the property value at about $20 million. Wow. And the loan is close to $40 million. It's 60% occupied. This property had a celebration of life ceremony at the property very recently for someone who was shot on the property.
Oh, man. At
the celebration of life ceremony at the property, 4 more people were shot. And they're renting to absolutely the worst possible unscreened tenant profile because that's all they can get, because they've not taken care of this asset. They haven't renovated this asset. They haven't invested back in the community, and that, you get out what you put in. Wow. And so the people that have been sort of just robbing the piggy bank and going out and syndicating deals, and then they create their own little construction company, and then they, abscond with half the money that should have gone to renovating the property. I see it over and over and over and over again in deals right now. They were just surviving because the rates were so low that they could keep up with the greater fool theory. And that next person would overpay to them, just like they overpaid to the last guy. And the cheap money was making all that possible. And that wild greed and speculation was getting investors to just get more excited and keep on doubling down. But that's all going to come to a screeching halt, because the fact is that there's just too many billions of dollars here locally and trillions of dollars nationally of loans that are in trouble. And from an economic perspective, there's no reason to believe that we're going to enter back ever in our lifetime into those crazy, what the Fed funds rate was like less than 1%. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You remember at one point it was like negative interest rates basically in certain economies around the world. That's all manipulated, hocus pocus. The reality is that rates today are more historically at a normal level. Mm-hmm. They're not crazy high. They're just high compared to when they were artificially low, right? Yeah. So there's a huge opportunity that people can take advantage of right now by getting into real estate investing, because the timing is very, very good. And, those higher rates increasing the cost of capital forces prices down. And, your loan term should not dictate your real estate investment. Cash flow is wonderful, but everybody that I know that's worth hundreds of millions that started with nothing in real estate, every single one of them will tell you they made the vast majority of their wealth from the equity that they built up in their properties and from their capital gains in these properties, not just from the cash flow. The cash flow is nice. And certainly that's a starting point to cover your bills. But when you're talking about real wealth, it's typically coming from those capital gains. And if you can get a very low cost basis, because the rates are a little bit higher right now, and you have to, accept a little bit lower cash flow than you would have if the rates were really low, who cares?
Right.
Because the massive equity capture you're getting by buying at that discount and having that low cost basis that's literally forever, once you've gotten that in a deal, that's far more valuable than some short-term cash flow. Yeah. And so I think right now is both, I guess, to be, Dickensian about it, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times, Tale of Two Cities. Yeah. That's what we're in right now. And so those are exciting times for people that can take advantage of it, is the positive message. the negative message, if they're waiting for the white knight to ride up on their low interest rate horse and rescue them from their bad decisions, good luck with that.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I've been emailed a couple of people's rate caps on the, as they come down to renew them. And man, it's unreal, like how it skyrocketed. And so they're doing all capital calls and halting all, distributions, and people are it's going to get way worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
Well, Trey, this has been an awesome episode. I think our listeners are in for a treat with this one, but just one more question and I'll let you go, I promise. So,
okay, great.
If you were just starting out and could go back in your early 20s, what advice would you give yourself?
I would say don't ever sell anything. All these deals that I've sold, I could kick myself. I mean, look, I don't believe in buying deals when they're overpriced. I don't believe in over leveraging deals. So you don't always buy everything. But what's interesting is the people I know that are the wealthiest in real estate, they sit on stuff for a really long time. And, I've got a deal right now that I bought for $20 million. I have no partners in it. It's a 488 unit property. It's 10 minutes from my house. My wife and I go 2-3 times a year to buy everybody lunch and hand out bonuses and, thank them. And that's literally all we ever do there.
Wow.
Which was 18 years later. That's how it is when you go into a property that long. But it was appraised a couple of years ago for $60 million.
Wow. And
I was talking to my mortgage broker the other day if I wanted to go get a supplemental loan with my Freddie loan right now, just to take out more cash to buy more deals now that I see all these low prices because of the high rates. And we were talking about what he thinks the appraisal would come in at. And I've increased the income per month by over $90,000 a month from what it was 2 years ago when I had that last appraisal at $60 million. So he feels like it would probably come in, even with a little bit of cap rate expansion, probably in the neighborhood of $70 million right now. So you look at a property I bought for $20 million and now it's worth $70 million. A lot of people think, well, Trey, you added $50 million in property value. You must be some sort of real estate genius. Nope. It's just the fact is that real estate works when you're in it on a long-term basis.
Yeah.
Whoa,
and the fact that I've owned that property for 18 years, Warren Buffett, I keep quoting him, but he talked about some kind of quote, I'm going to mess it up, but something like, compound interest is the most powerful force known to mankind. He said something like that. And what happens in these real estate deals that people don't see is that it's compounding, right? So if it appreciates at 5 or 10% a year, what happens is then it appreciates off that new increased value. So the amount of appreciation the following year is more than the year before it on average. Now, in any given year, it can go up, it can go down, it can be flat. But over time, it does go up, in value in that way. And so that compounding of increase in value and tenants paying down your principal for you over a very long period of time is so powerful that I feel like I should have structured all my original deals to still own them today. I mean, my net worth would be several times what it is right now if I had just not sold those properties, because my cost basis, even on the ones that I felt like I probably overpaid for, is like nothing compared to what those properties are worth now. Even after the recent maybe 28% or so price correction, it still would put me in an incredible position with those deals. So yeah, it was nice to cash out and make money and all that good stuff. But the thing is that in the long run, put together your deals, renovate them right, and own them for the long term. And then real estate becomes very easy because over time, the equity just builds up so much. And the people that don't do that, that are always buying and selling, I have friends that have taken that approach. They're always buying and selling and buying and selling, buying and selling. They're not really wealthy today. And they've done more work than what I've done.
Right.
But being a long-term investor, let the real estate do the work for you. And it does amazing things.
Yeah. I love that.
It's awesome.
That's great.
Well, we really appreciate you being with us today and sharing all that. That was awesome. If you want to reach out and again touch base with Trey and his team at Transformational Real Estate Investing, please text Wolf to 281-990-1108, and they will get you all the information you need and answer any questions. So, Trey, again, it was awesome. We look forward to doing more together and look, we're going to take you up on that dinner here soon.
Yeah.
So, but again, thank you.
Let's do it. That'd be fun, guys.
Anything we can ever do for you, please let us know. But thanks again for joining us.
All right,
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure. And Joni, I've got to add that you helped me so much just in this past week. I get so much knowledge from you.
Oh,
but in that WhatsApp chat group that we're both a part of, I loved your tip about later.com got my staff all over it. So just so you know, I'm stealing your excellent ideas all the time. Keep them coming. They're great. And anyway, look forward to getting together, guys. Have some dinner, catch up.
No, that would be awesome.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks, Trey. And we will see everyone next time. See ya.
Thanks, you guys.
You've been listening to Inside the Wolf's Den, an entrepreneurial journey with Shawn and Joni Wolfswinkel. Tons of entrepreneurial podcasts are out there. Talking. But Joni and Shawn are living it every single day. Their portfolio now includes many franchises and medium-sized businesses. We talk about the trials and motivators of successfully running a business. Join us again soon for another podcast. But until then, reach out on the website at InsideTheWolfsDen.com, on Facebook at Inside the Wolf's Den, on Instagram at Inside the Wolf Den. We'll see you again soon. This is Inside the Wolf's Den. We'll see you next time.